Hello and welcome to our flip lesson on plot. Today we're going to take a look at our third element of fiction, which is plot, and really take a deeper look into what the parts of the plot mean. I know in elementary school you've heard of plot as the beginning, the middle, and the end of the story, but really there's a lot more to it, and we're going to take a look at those different parts of the plot today. So what is plot? Well, it's the sequence of events in a literary work. And how I like to think of it is kind of like a roller coaster. Okay, think about a story and think about a roller coaster. They're the same in that there are many twists and turns and ups and downs within both of them. Thinking back to the stories that we've read this year, there have been a lot of twists and turns in our story, and you don't know what's going to happen. And that's what makes a good story, something that makes you want to read on. So throughout our flip lesson, I'm going to have you fill out these notes. Just like our conflict flip lesson, you're going to be filling out these notes, but I'd like you to pause at certain places during the flip lesson so that you can write down each of these notes. For the focus part, I would like you to write plot, also the date. Okay. Over here in our left-hand column, we have our Q column. This has all of our terms, and they're already listed there for you. And then we have our definitions on this side. This is where you're going to write down the definitions to all of our terms. At the bottom, we're going to have you answer that final summary question, and we'll get to that at the end of the flip lesson. So let's take a further look into the parts of the plot. Our first part of the plot is called exposition. This is the beginning of the story, where the characters and the setting are introduced. Okay, it's almost like setting up the story in a way so that the reader understands what's going on. They know the characters, they know the setting, and they're ready for the rest of the story to happen. I like to think of exposition as part of the roller coaster. In exposition, this would be the part where you've just been seated in the roller coaster, you've been buckled in by the attendant, they've checked to make sure that your seatbelt is tight, and they've kind of given you all the rules, right? There's no hands outside of the cart. All that stuff. So they're getting you ready for the ride, but the ride hasn't actually started yet. In the exposition, the characters and the setting are introduced, but the story hasn't really started yet. Nothing has actually happened to make the story move forward. We haven't seen any conflict yet. So I'd like you to look at setting next. Normally you've heard that setting is where and when a story takes place, but it's a little bit different. It's a little bit more in middle school. We need to include the specific place, the time period, and the duration in our settings. It's no longer just where and when it takes place. It is the place, time period, and duration. So what does that mean? Well, everyone knows the story Cinderella, so let's look at that. The place would be Cinderella's house or the castle. The time period would be not present day, right? This happened a while ago. So either 1800s or mid-1900s, depending on the version. And the duration would be a few days. We're making sure to include all of those parts. If we look at another story, maybe The Dark Knight Rises, we have place would be Gotham City, the time period would be present day, and the duration would be a few days. Now, you might not always know the duration, but you need to make a good estimate. It could be a day, could be a few days, a few months, a few years, 5 years, etc. It's really just how long the story takes place. It is not how long it took you to read the book, right? That is a common misconception, and really it's just how long it takes the character to move through the story. So here's where you're going to pause for your notes, and you're going to write down these first parts of our notes, where we have setting, and then our first part of the plot, exposition. So go ahead and pause your notes, and we will get started. When you're ready to come back, just press play. Alright, so we've talked about the exposition. Next is the initiating event, and this is where we first see conflict. This is the incident or the event that sets the conflict into motion. So it starts the entire conflict and really gets the ball moving. Initiating, another synonym for initiating, is first. So it's almost like the first event that kind of moves the story forward. And we've talked about conflict before in our previous flip lesson, and conflict is where the main character is struggling with something. So the first time we see that with the main conflict, whatever the main character is struggling with, is the initiating event. And if I'm going to go back to my roller coaster analogy, this would be where you first hear that clicking sound, okay? If you've ever been on a roller coaster, you know exactly what I mean. The ride has started and you are about to go up that hill and you hear that click, 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 click sound. Right? You can't really see anything, but you know that you have hit that first event when you hear that first clicking sound. So I'd like you to pause again for your notes and write down, sets the main conflict into motion, and ask yourselves that question: what has to happen in order for the conflict to exist? What event is happening to kind of create this conflict in our story? You can also write down some of those kind of roller coaster analogies. I find those pretty helpful when I'm writing my notes. And when you're ready, come back, press play. Welcome back. The next part is our rising action. Okay, these are the series of events that build from the initiating event to the climax. And it may contain several mini conflicts that move the action or the story forward. You know, we've talked about conflict at length already, but we know that in our stories we don't just have one conflict. We have multiple conflicts going on at the same time, and really all sorts of different conflicts. All are different types of conflicts and all different kinds. And that really helps kind of make our story, right? Without conflict, we wouldn't have a story. So when we're looking at the rising action, this is what kind of moves the story from the initiating event all the way to the climax. And there could be several conflicts along the way. I like to think of this as you're going up, 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 up that hill when you're in that roller coaster. And you kind of can't see anything. All you know is you're just going up higher. So go ahead and write your notes and then come back to the video. Alright, so we've reached the climax. This is the point at which the highest tension occurs. And it's the last moment that you can ask yourself, I wonder how the protagonist is going to solve the main conflict. Okay, at this point you have no idea what's going to happen in the story. And it's almost like, you know, I know whenever I get to the climax of a book, I cannot put it down. I have to read on. I have to find out what's going to happen next. And this is the point where it's the highest tension, okay? You have no idea what's going to happen next, and you're wondering how the protagonist is going to solve that main conflict. So you probably guessed it, but this is the part of the roller coaster where you're at the tippy top. You can't see, you know, anything other than you are just at the top, and you know something's going to happen next. Right, you're at that top and it's kind of tipping over the edge and you're about to have the ride of your life. So let's go ahead and, one other thing that I almost forgot. Sometimes the climax will go back to the initiating event and then go to the rising action and back to the climax. It just depends on the story. But let's go ahead and fill out our notes for the climax portion. And when you're ready, come back to the video. Alright, so we've just had the climax and now we're in the falling action section. This is the part of the roller coaster where you are dropping down. Okay, it's the events after the climax that close the main story and begins with the first moment that you know how the protagonist has solved the main conflict. You kind of figured that out and it's ready for the story to end. So go ahead and pause your notes and fill out the falling action part of our plot notes. Alright, and lastly we have our resolution. This is the very end of the story that brings a sense of closure or leaves the reader wondering what can happen next. Okay, this is the end of the story, right? Brings the sense of closure, or it leaves you wondering what could happen next, and that would be a cliffhanger ending. So go ahead and pause your video for notes and come back when you're ready. Alright, so plot can be thought of visually like a roller coaster, okay? This is what I was talking about all through the video, but you have the exposition part, right, where they're telling you all about the roller coaster, the initiating event, where, you know, the first conflict happens. Then you have your rising action, where you have all those mini conflicts up to your climax, where you're at the highest tension, you're wondering what is going to happen next, how is that main character going to solve the conflict. Then you have the falling action, you know how they solved the conflict, and finally the resolution. Okay, this model works for most stories, but not all. For example, sometimes the initiating event comes before the story even starts, or the climax is at the end of the book and there is no falling action or resolution, and that would be called a cliffhanger. Right? So go ahead and fill in the last part of your notes, which is your plot diagram. And we are finished with our video. There's a few questions that I'd like to ask you. I'd like you to think about the different kinds of conflicts. While the climax is the greatest point of tension, there are also several other conflicts that could happen along the way. And this is what makes the story interesting. And these conflicts can also be thought of little bumps along the rising action, or think of them like small hills on a roller coaster ride, just like that. That internal and external conflict can help comprise the rising action. Your summary question at the bottom of your notes is: the initiating event is directly tied to the blank. The falling action begins when blank. And try to figure this out. We will talk about this. This will be our warm-up for class tomorrow. Try and figure it out on your own. But your reflection question is: why is identifying the main conflict so critical to identifying the plot, or the events in the plot? Okay, so those two questions will start us off with class tomorrow. I've really enjoyed having this flip lesson with you. I look forward to seeing your notes completed in class tomorrow. Have a wonderful afternoon.